Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry to get my act together here.
No, that's fine. I just opened up the meeting about 3 minutes ago, and I'm going to start letting people in as they join.
Yeah, I'm going to go off video here for a second while I clean up my area around me. I'm down in my brew shack, but it looks like a bomb went off in here.
Same. I mean, I got all this going on over here.
Yeah, I saw you moving stuff around.
Hey, Jamie, what's that tap behind you? I think it's an IPA handle, but it's the kind of twisted one.
Yeah, that's one I made. It's just a custom one.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Got a little chalkboard on it.
I like that.
There's a place in the valley that sells high-end fencing and stuff, and they throw away pallet wood that's teak and oak and mahogany. And so I go around and buy and get this free mahogany and stuff and make tap handles and stuff with it.
Where's that?
It's on Craigslist all the time when they put the stuff out.
Okay.
But yeah.
Very cool.
Good morning, y'all. I see you you joined without me.
Yeah, well, I opened it a few minutes ago, and I guess you weren't here yet, so I thought I'd start letting people in.
That's fine by me.
Looks like Brad connected nice and early. I don't know if you can hear me yet, Brad, but
No,
we'll
he's
get
still
things going in 10 minutes or so.
yeah, he's still not connected to audio. I want to do business real quick before we get into the presentation.
Yeah, of course.
And then we'll do that. So all right, we'll give it a couple bits. I'll be back.
Sounds good. I'll just let people in. Hey, Brad,
Test.
we can hear you. You're, I don't know if you heard me a minute ago, but you're a couple minutes early. Usually we give an extra couple minutes for people to come in. We'll probably have another 10, 15 people coming in, I'd imagine. At least.
Wow, nice photo, Craig.
Fancy pants.
Make note of the beer. It's Fancy Pants from Paperback.
I thought that was a good 4-pack they gave us.
I did too. This guy, Ian.
There's your friend Mick.
Yeah, of course. Ian is our newsletter editor.
Yes, hello.
Can anybody hear me?
Can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome.
Morning, Benno.
Good morning, everyone.
I see
Benno
our
looks
youngest
like a
board
mountain
member
man.
joining us.
Good morning.
I thought Craig was live for a second. I was like, wow, he's pretty still there. But he's not live.
Sure is taking him a while to pour that beer.
Yeah.
Good morning, y'all.
How you doing, Drew?
I'm doing good. Welcome to the party. Glad you made it home in time.
Yeah, I slept in a little bit. We got home at like after midnight.
Now, how far did you drive? You said you drove from Texas?
San Antonio to Northern Virginia.
Good Lord, man. All right. Hey, Craig, I can't remember if on Friday I told you that I'm really digging the bottle.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I love it. I wish I had some details on it, like ABV and whatnot. But of course, back in the day, I also had to laugh, like just comparing the weight of that bottle versus like a modern long neck. Good Lord, this thing's like
Yeah.
you could use this to bean somebody.
I noticed that the label has perforations in it. That
Yeah.
I guess that was their way of coding beer or things.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can tell it's like way too purposeful pattern to just be like random damage.
It looked like 2021 to me, and I thought that'd be weird.
Hey, everyone.
Howdy. All right. So just to get everybody primed for what's going to happen here, we're gonna let people gather in for just a little bit, and then once we get people in, I'm going to run us through some club business real quick, and then we'll turn the floor over to Brad. And Brad, you can do your due, and I imagine people are going to have questions for you. So, all right.
You wanted me to talk about Beersmith, right?
Yep. Yeah, because I think there were a lot of people who, from the people that wrote into the topic suggestions, it seemed like one of their big concerns was, how do they get the most out of Beersmith? How do they configure it correctly? How do they get water to work in it and all that sort of good stuff? So I figured those are questions that you're well used to. So, all right. So we'll give it like 4 minutes or so, your usual. How about you all? But at work with all my conference calls, none of my conference calls actually start on time. They all start at 5 minutes after.
Standard brewer's time.
In this case, also standard computer programmer time. Swear to God. I say that as a former computer programmer. Nowadays I'm not nearly as useful since I'm management.
I hear you on that one.
Yeah, it's like I used to be useful, and then I became a manager.
Yeah, now I'm just a people person.
Exactly. I'm good with people. Engineers are not good with people. I feel like I have that conversation sometimes. Quick show of hands. How many of y'all got a can of the Homebound? All right. Good. We'll talk about that afterwards. Hello, Sam. Please don't pee on that. Got to keep an eye on the little Chihuahua whenever he comes in here. He wants to pee on half the stuff. What you doing? Sam, say hi to everybody. Everybody say hi to Sam. You good boy?
Hi,
He's only 16.
It's a young 16.
Oh yeah. Well, if cussedness were a way to stay alive, he'd probably make it until about 25. All right, where are we at? Still getting a couple people. And
I think we
Gavin?
got most of the familiar faces, but yeah, we got a couple more minutes.
yeah. Let's say there's John. Did we just lose Gavin?
No, he's on the bottom right.
Okay.
I think it was Gavin that came up with this idea.
It was a couple people asked, so that was the reason why I bumped it up in the priority queue. All right, so let me go ahead and do the share screeny thing. All right, and Alon, you got this recording, right?
I do.
All right, good. All right, let me see. There we go. There's some way to do this in. All right, y'all should see my screen, right? I hope.
Yep.
Yes, correct.
All right, good. It's not a conference call until somebody says you can see my screen, right? Alrighty. So having said that,
You're muted.
yeah, am I muted? Can you hear me? All right. So let's get through the business real quick, and then we'll get to the fun part, right? So as you all will remember, Bernard resigned as president last month. I am serving as your temporary president. Please don't make me your permanent president. So we need to figure out who's going to be the president until September. So I am happy, willing to take volunteers. I'm happy and willing to take people being volunteered. So let me know, because frankly, I talk too much anyway, and you guys don't need to give me another excuse to talk more. Did also want to run across the stuffed sandwich tasting we had last month. We were very successful there. We sold out all the packs for the stuffed sandwich tasting in a couple of hours. And I think everybody who attended, we had fun. It was not as fun as being in person, of course, but I know some people ran up to the sandwich and got sandwiches, and continue to give more support to Marlene. So thank you so much. Expect me to put out more cries of attention for people to support your local businesses, including people who've been there to support us for years and years, like Marlene. All right. Cooler share. I wanted to thank Justin. I think you dropped a couple beers off in the cooler earlier this week, right? So thank you for that. Keep that going.
You're welcome.
Keep that going. Make sure that we can share some homebrew. I will try and bottle up some of my stuff here before telling and bring it to the cooler so people can try it as well. And don't forget, there is a spreadsheet for that, maltosfalcons.com/cooler. Happy hours have resumed. We had our first happy hour of the year yesterday, or not yesterday, sorry, Friday. Where's the weekend go? On Friday with why is my brain stopping? The Tarantula Hill. We had Tarantula Hill on Friday, and I think everybody was very receptive of their beers. I'm afraid if there had been more cans of the grade, it would have gotten very silly. Everybody seemed to like the grade. And speaking of things that are grade-esque, next week's happy hour, or this week's happy hour on Friday, will be with Green Cheek out of Orange, California. Yeah. Green Cheek is owned and run by Evan Price, who is an award-winning brewer, multiple award-winning brewer. I think if I remember correctly, he started at Noble Ale Works back when they actually were making good beer, and he was the reason for that. He went and he took over what had been Valiant Brewing Company in Orange and rebranded it and rebuilt it into Green Cheek. He is known for his IPAs. He is known for being a very, very fussy and dedicated brewer. So the range that we've got has 2 of his IPAs, our first nitro beer of the year of this whole project. So I'm really curious to ask him questions about how he's nitro canning on a small scale. And then the other one is also right up John Aitchison's alley, which is his very, very traditional Kolsch. Evan has apparently been working on it for years to dial it into exactly what he feels like he got in Cologne. So that's a good one. There is also a add-on beer. So the regular 4-pack is $17.50. There is an add-on for an extra $10. It's a pricey add-on where you can get the Mocha, which is his Imperial Stout with a whole bunch of good stuff in it. 12% alcohol. We are going to be among the first people to be able to taste the Mocha Mocha Mocha. So that's a special edition. When you go to the website and you order, and remember, order by Wednesday morning. When you go to the website and order, if you choose the extra beer and then you say, hey, I'm buying 2 packs, you'll get 2 cans of the Mocha Mocha and be charged 20 extra bucks. All right. Any questions? No? Good. And don't forget, if you have suggestions for the happy hour, let us know. We are currently booked, I think, until the middle of February. So we're about a month out now, which is awesome. Like us being that well planned. I don't know why the hell we don't do it more often, but apparently this time we can. Speaking of planning, membership, we're putting out that renewed call for members. If you haven't paid in a while, which I know there's some of you who haven't, please go on the website and buy your membership. We're going to be reaching out and contacting more people as we can, because after all, your fundage actually helps keep the club running. Doug King, do we have Ed or Eric on? Silence being compliance. Doug King is actually still on for
Eric
this.
needs like 5 minutes. He'll be here.
Okay. Well, I'll just put the disclaimer out there. Doug King is still going to be on for this month. Later, Dana is working on the website to pull it up. It's going to be all the usual rules, but we're still going to do socially distanced judging, virtual judging, and all that sort of good stuff. But the competition is on. It has not gone away. Jenna, as one of our SCHF reps, can you tell people what's going on there?
Last month, if you paid through PayPal for your SCHF ticket for 2020, they reimbursed everybody. The only problems that they're having is if you paid with a credit card instead of PayPal, they're figuring out a way to reimburse you for that. There might still be an SCHF this year, depending on how fast vaccination happens and all that fun stuff that I don't really want to get into. So I am still booking campsites for that weekend, and I think it's like April 30th through May 2nd. The CHA is not going to be doing our campsites for us this year. So I will have the option to cancel them if it doesn't happen. If not, we could still go camping and have a good time, socially distanced, of course, if nobody's been vaccinated at that point, or we can cancel it. It's not the end of the world, Not the first time we've had to cancel a couple things this past year. More to be announced as that arrives. But again, if you have any questions, you can contact CHA about your refund. I got mine, I feel like a week or two before Christmas. So you might have gotten it and not known what it was for. That's what it was for.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. And then in that same vein, AHA HomebrewCon is supposed to be in San Diego this year. Obviously, as with all things, still up in the air. So it's either going to be in person or it will be virtual. It will still happen. If it does happen in person, the club is going to want to have a good presence there. So make sure that you're prepped, and maybe we'll have to brew some beers quickly. Okay, beyond that, support your local businesses. You guys know this. We're going to keep doing our part as much as we can. Make sure you go buy your ingredients over at the shop. I know Amazon and other online ordering places are convenient, but go order something from the shop, please. All right. And with that, anything else before we move on? Any other business I've forgotten? Going once, going twice. All right. So without further ado, I am going to stop my share here. Boink. And we should be back to normal. All right. Let's go ahead and get started here. Brad. Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Welcome to the party, man.
Happy Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. So here we are. It's a nice balmy 65 degrees here in Southern California. I'm enjoying it.
Probably 35 here, something like that.
Good thing for heating. All right. So those of you who don't know, Brad is, of course, the author of the wonderful program Beersmith. And I think do you still have 2 out there, or are you just now Beersmith 3?
Well, Beersmith 3.1, I guess, is the latest version. And I do recommend you download that if you've already got 3. It's a free upgrade. So
there you go.
But it's got quite a few features, and it's a lot more stable too in a lot of ways.
There we go. So I'm going to let Brad go and tell you all what the hell goes on with this program and how to get the most out of it. And then I guess we'll open up the floor and let people ask questions. All right.
Sounds good.
All right. So without further ado, Mr. Brad, take it away.
Yeah. Well, first of all, first order of business, I'd like to nominate Drew Beecham for president. I think he'd be really good. He talks too much and he's a little annoying, but he's okay.
Just a little.
No, I'm going to do a little presentation about Beersmith. It's kind of an overview. I know you guys probably have more specific questions, but the program's big. And so you got to start somewhere. So, give you kind of an overview of what it does and some of the easy things you can do to help make it better, and help set up. And then we'll probably get into some more details as we go, and including some of the new stuff I'm working on. I'm working on a web version and some things like that. So, anyway, so I'm Brad Smith. I wrote Beersmith in 2000. Oh boy, and 3, I think it was something like that was the first version published. So it's been out for a while, and we're the current version is 3.1. You can go to beersmith.com and grab it if you don't have it. Here's a quick overview of what the program does for you, and some of the topics I'm going to cover. And so, we're going to cover things like creating a good equipment profile, which is very important for getting started with the program. We'll talk about a little bit about building recipes, including some creative ways to build recipes using the different tools that are in the program. And then I'll walk through some of the Brew Day features. We'll talk about the cloud, the mobile version. I'm working on a web version, and how those things interact together. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the new features that were added in Beersmith 3, Beersmith 3.1, and some of the stuff I'm working on now as well. So, so quite a bit of ground to cover. And as I mentioned, I'll take some questions afterwards. So the basic outline here, Beersmith 3 is sort of an all-in-one tool for beer brewing. It's focused around recipe design primarily, although it's got, inventory and shopping lists and a bunch of other calendars and stuff. Sort of auxiliary tools to help you as well. Stuff up here. But the overall goal is to help you make better beer. Makes it easier to create your own recipes by hand, and helps you brew beer right the first time. So that's really our goal here. There's a lot of resources out there for Beersmith. There's tutorials out there. There's a forum. There's a newsletter that's very popular. I got almost 100,000 people on my newsletter, where I send out articles every week. There's a Beersmith Recipes Cloud, which now has well over, actually, that's a little dated. It has well over 1 million recipes on it now. The downside, of course, is there is a little bit of a learning curve. The software is fairly sophisticated. And, if you put garbage numbers in, you get garbage numbers out. I occasionally, every couple months, I get somebody that said, your software made bad beer. And I tell them, well, it actually wasn't the software that made the bad beer, but you know how that goes. So I'm going to start with creating an equipment profile, because this is really the one thing you need to do other than installing the software to be able to build recipes. So it's important to understand kind of how the equipment profile system works. If you're using, some standard brewing equipment from Blickman and a number of others, you can go to the add-on feature, which we'll talk about in a minute, and pull down an equipment profile and just use that. But there's a lot of people that have homemade funky systems. And in that case, you actually do need to build something up. And so one of the things I understand about Beersmith is it kind of works backwards from the batch volume to get to the other numbers. So it sort of works, it starts with the batch volume and the original gravity and kind of works backwards to get a lot of the other details. So for example, if you're a 5-gallon brewer or a 10-gallon brewer, then typically that's your volume into the fermenter is typically how we measure that. That's what you would use as your batch volume for your recipe system or your equipment profile. And then from there, it's going to factor in things like the top up water. If you're an extract brewer, the true bloss, which we all have some true bloss because of hops and so on. Boil off and shrinkage to get back to a pre-boil volume. There's actually some shrinkage due to temperature of the water. The water actually shrinks by about 4% when you take it from boiling hot down to room temperature. Anyway, so all those things get factored in to get the pre-boil volume, and then the program factors in things like the grain absorption, because grain absorbs water if you're an all grain brewer, mash tun dead space, top up water, mash additions, and so on, to get back to your sparge volume and your mash volume. And so often this is a good way to work, putting in your equipment profile. If usually you start by putting in your batch volume, then put in your losses, or if you don't know exactly what they are, you can estimate them and then go back later and measure them. But that's kind of how the whole system works. And so it's important to understand that. And actually, originally, a lot of people ask me questions about original gravity and mash efficiency and all this other stuff. The efficiency system works much the same way. So the program uses the brewhouse efficiency, which basically ties your batch volume, your grains, to your original gravity. And then it works backwards from there. So when you talk about like pre-boil or gravity, that's actually estimated backwards from the original gravity, if that makes sense. So here's some tips on perfecting a profile after you got the basic setup, but basically you're going to measure your volumes at each step. You're going to use the measurements to adjust your profile. So if I have 2 gallons of boil off during the during an actual batch of beer, that's the number I'm going to put in there. So it's important that you measure these things. And sort of, sometimes it takes a couple iterations, a couple batches of beer to actually adjust your equipment profile and get it dialed in. The quickest way to do that is simply to brew some beer and measure the steps at each point. You can put that into what's called a session page, which I'll talk about in a minute, to help adjust the numbers. You can even do things like adjust your brew house efficiency as you go, just by taking measurements as you go, measure the original gravity, measure the gravity in the pre-boil. And then you can use the tools on the session page to adjust that number and get it dialed in for you. So I do want to talk for a minute about brew house efficiency because it's very important for all grain brewers. Brew house efficiency and mash efficiency are two different things. Brew house efficiency is a measure of the gross efficiency of your system into the fermenter. And mash efficiency is a measure of just how well you did in the mashing step. Okay. Beersmith uses the brew house efficiency, which is the gross number. And so it really is the number you would play with to adjust your original gravity. So if your original gravity is off, usually it indicates you need to dial your brew house efficiency up or down. Okay. And so it also, the other important thing to understand about this is it includes all the losses in the system. So for example, if I'm, throwing out 2 gallons of Trub, I mean, those are losses in the system. There's some gravity points that go with it and so on. So that gets included in this overall brewhouse efficiency number. So typically you're going to start with something in the 70 to 75% range. A lot of us start with like maybe 72%. And then you're going to brew a batch and you're going to see if your original gravity is on or not, and you can adjust it from there. The other number in the equipment profile people struggle with a little bit is the mash tun heat capacity. And that's just a number that kind of factors in the heat lost or absorbed by the mash tun. So when I take, hot water, pour it in with a bunch of cold grains and a cold mash tun, some of that heat gets absorbed by the mash tun itself. And sort of a rule of thumb is, take a guess based on the, there's some information in the equipment profile actually has some sample numbers if you got a stainless steel mash tun or a plastic mash tun with some good starting values, but then you're going to raise that or lower that if your mash temperatures are too high or too low. Okay, so once you have an equipment profile set up, and as I mentioned, there's a lot of pre-made ones you can download now. Then you basically can start building a recipe, and this is the main recipe design page. On the top left, you get things like the name, the equipment profile, so you can select your equipment profile there. The ingredients are shown in the middle, and you can add them using the choose buttons on the right side there. Also on the right side, there's a color glass that you can, that'll show the color as you start adding ingredients. It'll get darker and darker or whatever. And then down in the bottom, there's the style comparison box where you can compare it against the BJCP style guide. So if you're targeting a wit or a stout or something like that, you can bring up the style guide and it'll actually show you as you're building the recipe how it compares. On the bottom right, there's actually a whole bunch of custom fields. So you can bring up, I think it's well over 100 different parameters that you can use to, depending on what you're doing, to help you adjust the recipe. And these things include things like your estimated final gravity, bitterness ratios, how many, pounds of hops you have per barrel. I mean, you get into all kinds of stuff here. You can get details about your water profile and so on there. And then at the very bottom, you have the same sort of concept for mash and fermentation profile. So much like I'll set up an equipment profile for my equipment and use it once. There's also profiles for using different mash schedules. For example, if you want a single stage, double stage mash, a lager mash, a brew in a bag mash, these kinds of things are all factored in there. And they include the sparge options, like you can do batch sparge, for example. And same thing for carbonation. You can say, I want to keg the beer. I want to use sugar, table sugar for the beer. I want to use DME for the beer. I want to use honey for the beer to carbonate it. There's a whole bunch of profiles for that, and same thing for fermentation. So you have options down there. So to build a sample recipe, it's pretty simple. You really just start by entering the name and the recipe type. And so you got, it supports obviously all grain, partial, extract. Beersmith 3 supports mead, wine, and cider as well. So you can do mead, wine, and cider, which is a nice addition if you haven't brewed mead, wine, or cider, but they're nice additions to your brewing stuff because it's very likely you have all the equipment to do it right now if you're a brewer. They're very easy to make. Actually, they take a lot less time typically than beer. Anyway, so all that's built in. So then you're going to select an equipment profile. You're going to select your target beer style typically, and then you're going to just start adding ingredients. So it's fairly straightforward there. I do want to mention you can create your own ingredients. So a lot of people will go, I don't have this particular yeast variety or this hop variety. You can go to ingredients, hops, for example, if you want to add a new hop variety. And you can add grains, yeast, water, misc items the same way if there's something that you haven't used before. There's also these add-ons you can download, and there's thousands of different things you can download as add-ons that will add new ingredients as well. And I'll talk about that on another slide in a minute. Another concept to understand is that each recipe has a complete copy of its ingredients. So some people struggle with this, but for example, and the reason I do that, the reason each recipe has a complete copy of its ingredients is for archival purposes. You don't want to go back, 2 years later and brew a beer that you brewed 2 years ago and the recipe's changed. You see what I'm saying? If I make an adjustment to my equipment profile, I don't want it to necessarily go back and change a recipe that I brewed 5 years ago on a similar equipment profile, right? So each recipe is kind of self-contained. It has a copy of everything. It's got a copy of its ingredients, the profiles, and everything as brewed, so that when you go and record a recipe, it's as brewed. So changing your equipment or your profiles or ingredients in the database won't change something that you've already brewed. And then because of that, you kind of have two options now for customizing ingredients. So for example, if I edit an ingredient within the recipe, it's just going to change the ingredient for that recipe. So a good example of that is hop alpha. Like quite often, you're going to get a new package of hops, and it might not have exactly the same alpha as the previous package of hops you use. So let's say it's Fuggles or something like that. So you can go in and just edit that one recipe and change the hop alpha content for that one recipe. On the other hand, if you want to do a more permanent change, you can go into the ingredients views and you can change it for all future recipes you build. So if I go in and change the hop alpha or the potential of a grain or something like that, or the color of a grain, next time I build a recipe, it's going to use that for the future. That makes sense. So that's how that works. I just mentioned add-ons are a great way to get ingredients as well. You can go to File, Add-ons, and you can get all kinds of new stuff. And this includes yeast updates. I put out some 2020 yeast updates, and I put out some 2020 hop updates, which are very important to grab. So if you go just to the File Add-ons, select the hops one, for example, you can download all the new 2020 hops varieties, and those are fairly up to date. It was just updated a couple months ago. Same thing for yeast. I think we've got all the major yeast producers are in the yeast update 2020, at least the default yeast producers. And then if you want a specialty yeast of some kind that's not in there, or a specialty yeast provider, you can pull up the labs. And there's add-ons for almost every yeast provider, grain provider, and so on in the world in there at some level. And we're constantly working to try and update those. So, I mean, you can download, the entire Brees suite of malts. You can download Wireman. You can download, just about any brand name you can think of. And it puts their entire library into your profile. I mentioned there's just below the recipe builder ingredients, there's a style box, and it lets you match a style. So for example, I don't know, I think that one says strong bitter. So I mean, it's got the whole BJCP style guide, so you can select the style. You can click the little checkbox next to it if you want to look at details for the style, and the style guides are actually useful because they're all in there. So you can pull up all the ingredients and everything that are that you like to look at for the style guide itself. And at the same time, it has these little sliders that kind of update as you build the recipe. So you can get an idea if the original gravity, the bitterness, the color, and the ABV are all in, kind of within the guidelines for the style that you're brewing. And that gets all updated in real time as well. So that's kind of nice. There's all kinds of tools for adjusting your recipe. So, and I'll give you an example in a minute of how you can sort of combine these and do cool stuff. But some of the simple ones are scaling a recipe. So you can change the recipe size, or even more useful, you can scale it to match your particular set of equipment. So, if I grab somebody else's recipe and I want to brew it on my equipment, literally all I have to do is bring up the scale recipe dialog, push a button, and pick my equipment, and then push OK, and it'll scale everything to match it. There's a convert button that lets you convert between all grain and extract and partial mash. You can actually convert recipes between different style types. There's an adjust gravity button, lets you set the OG, bitterness, and color, same thing. There's a grain percent, there's a hop percent button, so you can play with the IBUs directly. And you can make all these adjustments, just makes it a lot easier to build a recipe. And here's a quick example of that. Let's say I want to build a recipe using the 5 ingredients that are shown here. Literally all I have to do is select the grains that I want to use. So I'll select these 5 grains, and I'll just add a pound each to the recipe. So I'm not even going to muck with the amounts or anything, right? And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the grain percent button, which is the little dialog that's shown on the screen there. And that'll bring up the grain percentages. And so let's say I want 71% Maris Otter and 15% corn and 7% caramel. I can type the numbers in there exactly like the percentages that I want. And I like to work with percentages a lot of times when I'm designing beers to make sure, I'm not building, I don't know, something with, half the grains are specialty grains or something like that. So, so you can type in the percentages here. Now I've got a recipe that has, like, I don't know, 2 pounds of Maris Otter and half a pound of corn or something like that. So the numbers are all wrong still. But now I can do this. I can click the little trick where I click the adjust OG button. So I got a basically a recipe with almost no grains in it, but I can hit the adjust OG button and set the OG to where I want to be. Let's say it's 1050. And push OK. And now all of a sudden, all the grains are going to get scaled up to match the gravity that I want, and yet still in the percentages that I want. So I haven't changed anything. And then finally, I can put the hops in, and I can click on the adjust bitterness button and play with the hop values. Let's say I want, most of my hops from the boil, and I only want a little bit from the whirlpool, and so on. I can play with those numbers and get them exactly where I want. And so that's a quick way to build a recipe that exactly the way I want, using the different tools without having to, sit there and manually play with the amounts and all this other stuff. For me, it's a lot easier to play with percentages. The recipe builder also has there's a bunch of other features here in Beersmith. I'm just going to walk through some of them, but there's a brew day timer tab in Beersmith. There's also one on the mobile version. That lets you do a timer, so you can walk your laptop out to the garage or whatever and brew, and sort of it'll remind you when to add hop additions or when to do the next mash step or whatever it is. So that's kind of useful. There's also a feature called a brew sheet. So after I set up my equipment profile, I built my first recipe. I can click on a button for the brew sheet, and it'll literally show me step-by-step instructions for building that recipe. So it's fairly easy to go from, a list of ingredients to literally step by step. Here's your mash temperatures. Here's the instructions. Here's the times. Everything's all in there for you. So you can also take that piece of paper out and help you when you brew. Here's a kind of a little known feature, but I often get the question, well, how do I keep track of multiple batches that have the same name or whatever? Let's say I'm brewing, Brad's Porter for the 10th time or something like that. So there is this little feature called the brew log that a lot of people don't know about, but basically every time I brew a recipe, I'll update the brew date on it just so I know when I brewed it and maybe the version number. And then I'll record the data in it a lot of times as I'm brewing, and there's a session tab for doing that. We'll talk about in a minute. But then all I do is I push the copy to log button, and now it'll copy that and put it into the brew log folder. So there's a folder in the program named brew log. And if I open up the brew log, it's got every recipe that I brewed, and it's got them, I can sort them by date. I can look by style. I can see, I can sort by name if I want to figure out how many times I brewed Brad's Porter, and so on and so on. So kind of a nice feature. And as I mentioned, because the program keeps everything as brewed, I've got, a complete, copy of that hasn't changed since I brewed it. So even if I change my equipment profile or something else later on, I got it exactly the way I wanted it. More features. There's, the Beersmith Recipes Cloud, which you can access from beersmithrecipes.com. There's over 1 million recipes on there. And this also acts as sort of a repository for sharing across platforms. So, I've got a desktop and a laptop. I can put recipes into the cloud, open them up and walk out and brew them on my laptop, or I can do the same thing with a mobile version. I can walk out in the garage, open up my phone, open anything that's in the cloud, run the brew day timer on my phone, for example, and all that. So that's kind of a nice feature. And the way this works, so you understand, because a lot of people ask me this question too, anything you put on your My Recipes folder is stored locally on your computer. It's not shared with anybody. Only things that you put in the cloud are in your cloud folder are stored on the server. And even those are not shared with anybody. There's actually privacy settings to prevent that unless you explicitly share them. But it's kind of nice. You can access this stuff from anywhere. With some of the latest updates I did, you can access the recipes now, the Beersmith Recipes site from your mobile device as well. So even if you don't have the mobile app, you can access a large portion of the functionality just by accessing the website itself. Here's another example using the cloud. So let's say I want to find a recipe to brew today. So I can go out, Drew's got some recipes shared there. I can go out and search for one of Drew's recipes on the Beersmith Cloud using the cloud search feature. When I find that recipe, I can make a local copy of it just by using the copy local button. And then I can edit that using the scale recipe command. So I click on the scale recipe command. It'll bring up a dialog, and all I have to do is pick my equipment profile instead of Drew's equipment profile, plus OK. And now that entire recipe has been scaled to match my equipment profile. And I could literally print the brew sheet out and go out and brew it. I could put it in the cloud, open it up on my phone and brew it. There's a whole bunch of ways to do that stuff. So it's kind of nice having that feature. This is just a little more detail on the privacy stuff, because people ask me this, particularly professional brewers are always asking me, well, what's shared on the cloud? What's not shared on the cloud? What's this, that, So the cloud folder is basically, you set up an account on beersmithrecipes.com. Now, when you buy actually a copy of Beersmith, it'll set up an account for you. You can log into that using View Cloud. Or you can also log into that you can search from the cloud, as I mentioned on the previous slide. Any recipes that you copy and paste into the cloud folder get stored on the server, and so you can access them from any of your devices. And as I mentioned earlier, recipes are private by default. So anything I put in the cloud is going to be private unless I specifically mark them public. And so the whole system now is actually secure if you're running Beersmith 3 or later. So it's all done using HTTPS, and none of that stuff is shared with anybody else. And then all those things are on your cloud account. They'll show up in your cloud folder anywhere else you're working as well. There's over a dozen brewing calculators and standalone tools in Beersmith. You can do the unit conversions. You can adjust gravity. You can play with the mash profiles. You can do hydrometer and refractometer tools. There's a ton of stuff here. You can play with all these tools separate from the recipe builder. So for example, here a couple examples that come up off the top of my head. Let's say my, original gravity going to the fermenter is too low. There's a tool that'll tell you how much DME or you have to add to get that gravity back up to where you want it to be, for example. Or let's say my mash temperature's too low as well. There's a tool there where you can do a quick calculation and figure out how much hot water or cold water you need to either raise or lower that temperature. There's a tool there to do keg weight volume. So for example, let's say, I know the weight of my empty keg and I've got a keg that weighs, 10 pounds more than that. I can put those numbers in and it'll tell me how much beer I have left in the keg. So these are useful things you can use that are kind of standalone tools. These are also available if you're a Beersmith 3 subscriber. They're available online at beersmithrecipes.com. So even if you don't have the program with you, you can open the online tools up with your phone and do these quick calculations if you need to. This is the inventory cycle in Beersmith. Beersmith has a shopping cart, so I can, if I'm brewing a recipe or I want to brew a recipe, I can click on the add to shopping list button. It'll go into the shopping cart, if you will. And then I can print that out. I can take it to the brew store. I can buy the stuff. And then after I bought it from shopping list view, I can click on the add the inventory button. It'll add it to the inventory view. I can see what's in inventory. I can, manage my day based on that. And then there's a remove recipe from inventory button on that also lets you remove stuff. So you kind of complete that whole circle if you want to. So a feature some people use. I'm actually looking probably next year to rewrite the inventory system. I'm going to go to a transaction-based inventory because there's a lot of professional brewers using it now, and they like more of a transactional system they can tie into their accounting system and so on. Here's some of the things I added in Beersmith 3. If you're still on I know a lot of people still are in Beersmith 2. But Beersmith 3 adds support for mead, wine, and cider was a big thing. And, the support there is fairly sophisticated. If you're a mead maker, for example, it's got all the tools that are built in now to do all the things you want, like mead nutrients. It'll calculate it for you. Hydrating your yeast. There's calculators that'll help you do that. And they're all integrated right into the program. So it's kind of nice. Same thing for cider, same thing for wine. And the fruit juices, honey, are now native to the program. So you can add fruits, you can add honey, you can add all that stuff. And it integrates with all the tools and works together. The mash pH adjustment stuff is all in the recipe. The integrated water profile tools, these are for all grain brewers, are now in the recipe builder itself. Makes it much easier to build your recipe profile or your water profiles in the program, in the tool, and also do adjustments for those. And there's also in Beersmith 3.1, there's new mash pH models too, so you can actually pick different models. I know a lot of people didn't like the MPH model because they were using brewing water or whatever. And so now you have adjustments you can make for that as well. This is some of the mead, wine, and cider support. So there's support for honey varieties, ingredients. There's fruits are adjustable by brie level. So, if you've got fruit juice and you want to incorporate it in your beer, you can drop a hydrometer in the fruit juice, take the brie reading off the hydrometer, which, by the way, brie and Plato are basically the same. They're within 1/1000th, I think, or something like that. So you can take the brie reading or the Plato reading by dropping a hydrometer in the fruit, and now you can enter it as an ingredient and use it. The Tansa, Tynosa, which are the mead nutrient calculators are built in. Support for high gravity alcohol tolerance is another thing that was built into the program that wasn't there before, and that becomes very important when you're making meads and wines, for example. The mead style guides in there, the cider style guides in there, the wine style guides are all built into the program. For all grain brewers, I know the water matching tools were a nice addition to Beersmith 3. So basically you can build and match water profiles now from within the recipe. So basically if I add a water ingredient to my to my beer recipe, I can go to the water tab now, and there's different tabs at the top of the recipe builder. I can go to the water tab now, and I can pick different water profiles that I want to use as a base. So I can say, you can get fairly sophisticated here. You can say, I want to use 4 gallons of my local water profile, and I want to use 3 gallons of distilled water, for example. And the program will actually calculate with the water profile that comes out of that. And then there's a way to adjust them as well. And so in that on this particular screen, the top sort of shows your water profiles that you've added to the recipe so far. The middle part shows your adjustments that you made, so the water salts, and those include any water salt ingredients that you've added to the recipe. But there's a button on the right there that lets you match target profiles. So I can click on that and match a target profile for a particular city. Let's say I want to match Munich, for example. And the program will do a least squares fit and actually give you the best fit it can for that particular water profile. And it can do separate additions for match and sparge as well, which is kind of nice. And it'll put those ingredients into your recipe. So you don't necessarily have to sit there and go, well, I need, 0.5 grams of calcium chloride or whatever. Instead, I can just go in here, put in my base water profile, click on the match water profile thing, pick the water profile that I want, and it'll do the numbers for me. And then this all feeds into the MASH pH estimator and the MASH pH tools, which are also built into the program. So when it calculates a final MASH water profile for all this stuff, it'll feed that in and use that to adjust the MASH pH. And as I mentioned, their MASH pH tool adjustment tool is also in the recipe builder. And in Beersmith 3.1, you can actually pick different models you want to use for the adjustment. But it'll give you the unadjusted MASH pH based on the grain bill and the water profiles that you picked. And then it'll allow you to do acid additions, which kind of that block in the bottom left there is all the acid additions that you made. So it'll give you an unadjusted and adjusted MASH pH based on those MASH additions. So you can play with the acid additions to get the pH level that you want, basically. And in the bottom right block, if you will, on that particular page, this is the MASH page, by the way. There is a little calculator that lets you adjust things. So you can put in a pH that you currently have and an adjusted pH that you want to get to, and pick the model, and then pick the acid you want to use, and it'll calculate how much you need to add. So that's how that works. So a little bit of advice. You do want to do this as a sort of the last step. So if I scale a recipe or I change a recipe or I'm messing around with my recipe, generally the last thing I want to do is set the water profile and set the MASH pH, because the problem is I've had people, adjust their MASH pH perfectly, and then they go back and change the grain amount. And then of course it's going to change everything. So they're just kind of a reminder to do this. This is sort of the last step you want to do before you brew, if you're into all this water stuff. Some more Beersmith 3 features. Support for Whirlpool hops and no chill are now much more sophisticated. So you can set both time and temperature in the Whirlpool hops additions. You can do no chill additions. I'm sorry, it'll do the no chill calculation for you. So if you got a extended Whirlpool time because you're doing some kind of a no chill, you can do that. There's also a feature that allows you to carry forward hops. So for example, let's say I got a 5-minute boil addition. It's a really short addition. If I check the block, it'll actually calculate that carrying forward, whatever's left of that, carrying forward into the Whirlpool. So in general, you want to do that because if you're doing a long Whirlpool addition, for example, or a long Whirlpool, those short hop additions will also continue to isomerize and add some bitterness into the Whirlpool. Anyway, some other things you can do: 2-stage yeast starters now. We talked about alcohol tolerance and yeast. There's cloud folders now. There's support for high altitude brewing. And there's a lot of new ingredients and changes to the database that I've made. One second. Beersmith 3.1 was released in 2020. It includes the alternate MASH pH models, tilt imports. You can do tilt import now from Google Spreadsheet or from CSV. There's new dry hop settings to support fermentation, dry hops, and things like that. So it used to be you just say, I want to dry hop, these hops for 3 days or something like that. Now I can actually specify I want to dry hop, 3 days into the primary, for 3 days and I want to dry hop, at the end or whatever you want, you can get a little more specific there. This one also has transactional data storage, which is one of the reasons I strongly recommend the upgrade. If, for example, it'll save data immediately on edit instead of the old system used to save kind of when you exited the program, which created problems if people crashed or more often they were using a laptop and they shut the laptop down and walked away and it never saved everything. So I do recommend that. It's much more stable. And you have better options for backup and recover. There's a full backup of zip and full recover from zip, which basically lets you create a zip file with all your data in it. And you can take that and even put it on a different machine and open it up and it'll recover all your data. So it makes it a little bit easier. I released the mobile version in the fall for Beersmith 3.1. It basically brings the mobile version in line with the desktop version, including the alternate pH models, the Sparge editions, and all this other stuff. It also moved to a SQL-based storage system, so a lot more stable. I was using a web kind of file system-based storage system, which created problems when people started putting, thousands of recipes on their phone. And so now the SQL-based one is a lot more stable. Click on recipes, go directly to edit. That is one thing people have struggled with a little bit. So now when you click on a recipe, it goes straight to the editor. We used to have these multiple levels and layers, which created, I don't know, some confusion for people. But if you were using the old version, you went to the new version, you got to get used to, okay, if I click on a recipe, it's going to go directly to edit. If I actually want to do something else, like run the brew day timer, I need to bring the little pop-up menu up. Right now I'm working on a web-based version of Beersmith. I started that actually last year. So the tools in the mobile-friendly version were added last year. And if you log into beersmithrecipes.com now and you've got a gold plus membership or whatever, you can access the 22 or so brewing tools directly from your mobile or desktop suite anywhere, basically. I do have a cloud version in development. So I have, eventually that'll allow you to do desktop and mobile recipe editing from any browser. So you don't necessarily even have to have the software on the computer. You can access it from work and such. Not that I would ever do that, right? So that's, and then I'm working on after that, actually a cross-platform data sharing. So it'll be the desktop first, but you'll have the option, for example, to share your ingredients and profiles to the cloud and then access them again from anywhere. So that's another option. And this is a screenshot of the early version of the recipe builder on the web-based version. But I'm slowly working my way through all that right now. So I'm hoping to have that out at least by HomebrewCon, have a web-based version of the editor available, and then the data sync I'm going to work on right after that. So anyways, that's what I'm working on now. I should mention, if you're new to Beersmith, there's a whole ton of stuff out there. So if you go to beersmith.com/video, there's video tutorials. If you go to the blog, there's actually kind of two useful things I added at the very beginning of the COVID lockdown. But if you go to the Beersmith blog, I've got 500 or 600 articles on beer brewing there. But I also have an index now of all the articles, and I have an index of all the podcasts I've done. 220 something podcasts now. And they're organized by subject, so you can look down that and see things. And there's also a lot of Beersmith articles in there too. So if you want to learn more about Beersmith and some of the hidden features, there's dozens and dozens of articles and videos on Beersmith there. A Beersmith forum is available as well. And then, of course, there's info on the mobile version. And then I have a newsletter and I have a podcast, which you can get into if you want to as well. The newsletter is nice because I just kind of send you an article on brewing every week, as opposed to a ton of spam. Although about quarterly, I do send some spam, so I apologize for that. You got to pay the bills. Anyway, so that's my presentation. I'd be happy to take questions. I'm sure you guys probably have quite a few. So I notice there's a couple in the chat room, so maybe I'll start with that. Where are we here?
Yeah, people have been scrolling through here. Let me see if I can
go ahead and
get some. So one of the first ones in there is Adrian's asking, is calcium hydroxide staring me in the face, or is it really not there? Because I've been unable to find it.
I do not have calcium hydroxide as an addition right now. It is something I could do, but no, I don't have it built into the program yet. Right.
And
Another one
I
is that another one people ask about is pickling lime quite often. One of the problems I have with pickling lime though is it actually has different effects depending on when you add it, which adds some complexity. But go ahead, Drew. Drew, you still there?
And then there was also one about Arrowhead water and profile. You have to make.
Okay, for Arrowhead, you have to
Not
build a
hear me?
custom water profile, right? I recall Deer Park being in there. Yeah, I don't think I have Arrowhead as a custom profile. Some of the water providers will provide a profile for you. Some of them, or I'm sorry, will provide the data you need. In some cases, they don't. So the ones that I was able to get data for, I put in there. Other questions?
Yeah, the Arrowhead available in Los Angeles is from their Olancha supply. You can go onto their website and actually plug in all the numbers. They
Oh,
publish it.
okay. Yeah. It's not a lot of data. It's only 6 numbers you have to type in. So to create a new water profile, it's fairly
Arrowhead
easy.
water is different where you buy it in the country, so you're not going to see the source and then go to their website and plug it in. But it all comes from Olancha, the one in LA.
Excellent.
All right, more questions.
Is your 3.1 available on both app stores, Apple and Android? I have a.
It is. It's called Beersmith Mobile. So try looking for Beersmith Mobile, and I think it'll pop up. And don't get the light version. The light version, we actually kind of I left it out there because there's some legacy users, but I'm not updating the light version at this time. So, and actually, if you want the functionality of the light version, you can log into beersmithrecipes.com, and if you're a member, you have basically the same functionality that was in the old light version just by logging in on your phone. But get the full version. And I did lower the price quite a bit. I think it was $4.99 now or something like that. So it's fairly economical.
So I have a couple of questions. One, on OS X, I'm currently at version 3.0.8 and it says it's up to date. Is that not correct? Or is that
That's
correct?
not correct. You need 3.1. And the reason I've been pushing the 3.1 update, and I put a couple newsletters out on this, but the auto update feature, we had a problem with a handful of old releases under 3.0 that caused it to crash when you go do the auto update. So that's why I didn't publish it as an auto update, if that makes sense. I didn't want to crash a bunch of people.
So I just have to go download the 3.1.
So unfortunately, yeah, you need to manually download the 3.1 update. But as I mentioned, if you have 3, it's free. So you just grab it and install it. And and it's a lot more stable. And if you're also, I've been getting a lot of questions about this. If you're running Big Sur on Mac OS X, you do need the 3.1 update because the 2.0 and the 3.0 will not run well under Big Sur. I've had a lot of reports of it crashing. But the 3.1 has all the fixes for that. So
okay. One other thing, I love the tilt import. I've been dying to have that for quite a while now. And then also one thing that you brought up that I didn't realize, I was always annoyed that when I got a recipe from a friend and I brought it in, I couldn't figure out how to get my equipment profile on that. And earlier on, you showed how to do that. So I really should have done a little more research on that.
Yeah, you just click on scale recipe and that's the way to have it adjust everything to match your profile.
Yep,
so
that's great. And then my last thing here was you have a version for each recipe, but it doesn't seem to be able to track the difference between versions. So what I end up doing is doing a copy and paste. So I've got, say if I brewed a recipe 15 times, I've got 15 different recipes that I just add a date onto the end. Is there any way to actually have a version within one recipe and go back in history and see what the difference is?
I do not, but if you go to that, as I mentioned, the brew log is the way I manage it. So what I'll typically do is change the date, change the version number, and then store it in the brew log when I'm all done with it. Does that make sense? So then now if I go to the brew log, if I want to, I can sort it by version number. I can sort it by, to sort anything, you just click on the column header. So I want to sort by name, I click on the name. If I want to sort by version number, which you can add, you can also customize the column. So you can, if you want to, in your recipe, you can show anything you want almost as a column. But then you click on, so I can sort by date. I can sort by version number. I can, anything you want.
Okay.
Or
that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's how I do it. I just keep all the recipes in the brew log and then, access it that way.
Okay, well, thank you. And
Yeah.
I've been using your software for years and love it. So keep up the good work.
I'm hoping to keep going for a little while.
One of our members, John Aitchison, is asking if you already have an extensive list of Beersmith 2 recipes, ingredients, and equipment profiles. Will all of that transfer over to the new version?
Yeah, if you're running version 2 and you install 3 on the same system, it'll actually ask you if you want to import your version 2 data, and you can import everything. It'll literally import everything. And there's also a command to do that later. If you forget, it's file import. I think it's under file import Beersmith 2 directory. And then you point it to wherever your Beersmith 2 data was, even if it was, from somewhere else, and it'll import that whole directory of stuff. So very easy to do.
Perfect. Gavin, you had a question?
Yeah, before my question, I've got to tell Brad, your software is just phenomenal, man. I've been brewing for 2 years, and on day 1, I downloaded your Beersmith 2, and everything I've learned about brewing, I'd say 90% is through your software. I'm a software nerd, so I go through every menu item, every button, every calculation, and I learned everything I know about brewing from using your software. And
Well,
literally
thank you. It's very, very, very kind. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Incredibly exhaustive. The question I have for you is, well, 2 questions. One has to do with efficiency. As a home brewer, brewhouse efficiency is not that big a deal for me. I always overbuild my recipes, so I have a little bit of waste. It's not a huge amount of money. For me, what's really important is my OG, and mash efficiency is what it's all about. And there's no way for me, is there any way for me to actually enter it in the profile? I've got to work backwards, enter the brew house, go to the recipe, see what it counts.
So no, unfortunately, you do have to work backwards. You do. But if your OG's off, and I guess I didn't cover this in detail, but there's a session tab, right?
Right. Yes.
If you go to the session tab in a recipe, so let's say I had a recipe and I brewed it, okay? And I took measurements all the way along the way. So I measured my volumes, I measured my gravities, I measured all that stuff along the way, right? You can go to the session tab and enter that data. And if you enter that data, it will give you both a predicted brew house efficiency and an actual brew house efficiency.
I use that religiously.
And then you can use that to adjust and dial in your brew house efficiency.
The other question I have for future software development was, I recently also purchased Brewfather, and even though I still use Beersmith pretty much all the time because you're much more exhaustive, but the one sort of sexy, glitzy feature it has is the ability to, in real time, to talk directly to my tilt. And is there any way that you guys will have that in the future?
I haven't worked on it yet. I do have, I worked with the tilt guys when we put the tilt data import into Beersmith 3, right? And they sent me the API. So, I mean, I could in theory build it into the mobile version.
Right.
But I haven't started on that project yet, just because I've got a lot of other projects I'm working on at the moment.
It's really nice to, wake up at 6 a.m. and look at my phone and see how my fermentation is going on in the software. That's the
I think it's, it is definitely possible, and it probably wouldn't be a huge amount of work to add it, but it's a little bit of work because I've got, cross-platform, I'm using cross-platform tools, and I have to go down to the native APIs to get to it. But
congratulations.
But I'll make a note of that, and I'll try and see if I can slide that into one of the upcoming mobile versions.
But your software is just freaking amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
All right. We had another question in here. Can you talk about importing data for the iSpindle?
For the I'm sorry, which?
The iSpindle.
Oh, iSpindle. So I haven't played with it myself, but there was a gentleman in Germany that did take the iSpindle and was able to get the CSV import to work correctly. So for example, Beersmith 3.1 has the option to export data and import data in a CSV format. And it's fairly simple format. It's comma separated variable format. So and I can't remember the exact thing, but I think we put the time, the temperature, and the gravity reading basically into a CSV file, you can import it. So anyways, if you're interested in it, I can try and track down the email of the guy that did it, but he was able to do it. I think it was one of the beta testers actually was able to do it fairly quickly and just have the iSpidel stuff go into a CSV format and then just import it that way. Much like we did with, you can actually import the tilt data as a CSV format, although I customized it a little bit to their format. But so that is an option. Yeah.
Good. All right. Other questions? I know you guys have questions.
I got something. I apologize if I sound weird. I'm driving right now. I think you already touched on this a little bit, but I just want to clarify. If I wanted to design a recipe on my Mac desktop, but then access it on BrewDay via my mobile Android, is that possible?
Yeah, all you need to do is copy that recipe to your cloud folder. So you have a cloud in the program. There's a cloud folder, if you will. It's a special folder that gets stored on the server, and so you just copy and paste that recipe over to the cloud folder, and now you can open it in the cloud folder on your mobile device. So just same thing on the mobile device. The mobile device has local storage under My Recipes, which are stored on your device, and it has the cloud folder, which is stored on the server. So yes, you can.
Thank you.
A quick question. I think your main competitor, would that be Brewfather?
Well, they've been doing really well the last few years. Yeah, fairly recent, but they are coming up, I guess. And the main advantage they have is the web-based interface, which is nice. So that's one of the reasons I've been working on a web-based interface for Beersmith.
So I guess what I'd like to ask then is, what's one thing that you are proud of that Beersmith does that you don't think that they handle quite as well?
Oh, I don't know. I think the water tools on Beersmith are a little more, quite a bit more sophisticated. The databases are quite a bit more sophisticated. And just be able to access everything cross-platform is kind of nice. And still having dedicated program. But I don't know. My thoughts on Brewfather, and again, I'm not an expert on it, but I think it still sort of is in its early stages of development. They haven't got all the sophistication that Beersmith has in terms of tools, in terms of support, in terms of recipes. I mean, 1 million recipes. It's 200,000 users of Beersmith now. It's a pretty substantial group of people. So that would be all I have to say. I think they're doing great work, though.
That's a good answer. That works.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, as a user of both, one of the features that's lacking, it's very lacking, is the mash profile that Beersmith has. I use the mash profile in Beersmith all the time, especially if you're doing step mashes and you want to add hot water. It tells you how much to add, what your mash thickness is. They don't have any of that stuff, but otherwise they're pretty full featured in many regards, and they're working pretty hard. But they're not as exhaustive as Beersmith. No way.
All right. Then we have another question here. Does the log system store the notes tab for each brew session separately? I haven't played around with it yet.
So it will store, as I mentioned, every recipe is a complete copy of everything, including all the notes. So if you make notes for one session and notes for a different session, they're going to be very different. So yes.
Awesome. All right. Other questions?
I have a question, Drew. Brad, about your water feature. I know there's users that use Brew & Water, and and there's like a discussion about how accurate or precise your water feature is to Brew & Water.
Yeah. So I spent almost a month going through all this in excruciating detail, including all the source paperwork for it. And I enjoy Martin. He's a great guy. I sat down and talked with him about it as well. So the main difference between the two, when you break it all down, is there's a difference in how he approaches the acid additions. Okay. So the MPH model, which I use, is actually a model that was developed by D. Mark Riff, as a guy, a PhD. You can find him online. And it has, it's very well documented back to experiments that Kai Troyster did and experiments that were even done all the way back to the 1950s and so on, that have to do with mash water additions, pH estimation, and so on. So those models are very well sourced and documented, and I have, some confidence that they're accurate. However, the overall pH, I can tell you, having gone through all the math and all the chemistry and everything else, pH estimation is still a little bit of a black art. And the reason it is because we don't have all the data you would like to have from the maltsters. So if I wanted to do a perfect pH estimation, I would actually need like another 5 or 6 or 8 parameters for each of the maltsters on exactly how their malt affects the pH of the water. Does that make sense? So that piece is missing. We don't have that data. That nobody collects that data. The maltsters don't even measure that data. So so it's always going to be somewhat imperfect, but nevertheless, we seem to do okay on the mash pH estimation. Where the two models differ the most is on the acid additions. Okay. And when I talked to Martin and asked him about how he came up with that particular model, and effectively he treats the mash acid additions very much like he treats the acid additions from the grains. He told me it was empirically derived. So, I guess he must have done some experiments or something to come up with that. So that's why I used the MPH model originally, was because it is, like I said, very well sourced back to a variety of different people doing a variety of different experiments over a long period of time. Nevertheless, quite a few people prefer Martin's model. Maybe it works better for their particular brewing system. As I mentioned, because we don't have really accurate pH data from all the maltsters and how it affects things, there are some challenges there. So what I did in Beersmith 3.1 is now you can actually select the model. So if you prefer the MPH model, you can select the MPH model as your base model. I think you can even do it in the equipment profile. And if you prefer the sort of brew and water style of model, you can do that as well. So that you have that option. You can choose either one. I've had better results with the MPH model, which predicts generally a larger mash acid addition. The brew and water model typically predicts a much lower mash acid addiction, but your mileage may vary. So if it works for you, use whatever model you like, if that makes sense. Okay.
What has been your feedback from let's say pro brewers on using that water feature?
I've had a variety of feedback. I've had people I've had people tell me they use the MPH model, which again predicts a much larger amount of acid needed, and say, well, their mash pH still came in too high. And then I've had other people say, no, that's way too much acid and my pH came in way too low. I think in reality, because we're missing a lot of this other data that we'd like to have. For example, you go to Kai, if you look up not Kai Troyster, look up DMark Riff. He's done a bunch of new experiments on mash pH prediction, and he's come up with some fairly sophisticated ways of estimating the mash pH exactly. The reason this is so complicated, I should mention, is not only because you have grains, you're adding grains which have an unknown sort of buffering capacity in themselves, but the water itself in many cases has a difficult to predict a buffering capacity. And buffering capacity means ability to absorb acid, right? So when I mix acidic grains with water, I'll get a pH based on mixing, acidic grains with usually alkaline water. I'll get a pH of a certain value, right? And when I add acid to that, I'm trying to lower that pH down. Well, the problem is when I add acid to it, there's some of that acid gets buffered by the grains themselves. And the degree to which that happens is what generates differences between these different models, if that makes sense. And there's there's experimental stuff. I can point you to the experimental data that says it should be about this, but it's hard to predict that amount that gets eaten up gets buffered by the grains or by the water itself. So that's the hard part of the problem, and that's why the models are different. Yeah.
Thank you, Brad.
Turns out organic chemistry is tough.
It is surprisingly hard. It's not like high school where you go, oh, well, I'm going to add a mole of acid and it's going to come out, it's going to drop exactly this much. It doesn't work that way in the real world. So,
Right. And I also put in a note, I talked about this a while back when I talked water for the club, that the other thing that you have to realize that a lot of pro brewers are doing is once they figure out what their water does, they're rarely doing anything super complicated beyond that, right? So if they're going and making a Pilsner, they're using basically, oh, this is what I do when I have a light beer. And if they're making an IPA, that's what I do. And we've seen that in the happy hours too.
and they have a huge advantage too, because they can dial it in once, right? Or they can do a couple batches, dial it in, and then they don't have to worry about it changing. So, if they get their mash pH right for a particular recipe, they just brew that recipe over and over again. They're not like you and I that are probably brewing many, many different recipes all the time.
Exactly. Well, and again, we see it with like IPA brewers, like Tarantula Hill the other night. They're like, oh yeah, we do this with our water, and then it's all the water is the exact same, salts and acid addition, regardless of the fact that it's different beers, and that's very, very common. So Gavin did have one question. Gavin, what you were asking, what's the best time to take the mash pH?
Yeah, I mean, I typically do 10 to 15 minutes after doing in, but I find that as I take it every 10 minutes, it keeps dropping and dropping. So quite often I overestimate the amount of acid based on, let's say, a 40-minute.
Yeah, this is a question I get quite a bit too. So what I recommend personally, so here's the problem you'd like for the pH to be good when you're doing the sugar conversion, right? And the problem you have is modern malts are very highly modified, which means they have a ton of enzymes in them. So what happens is when I dough in, let's say I dough in a 10-gallon batch, it may take me 15 or 20 minutes to get all the dough balls out, get the temperature settled down, get everything, back where I want it to be, right? And during that time, the mash is converting. And because there's so many enzymes in there, it's converting relatively fast. I mean, in some cases, I've done an iodine test and my mash has been over in like 25 minutes. So if I'm spending 10 minutes getting the dough balls out and stuff, and then I, wait a little while, wait for the pH to settle and then take a pH measurement, it may almost be too late. So what I recommend to folks now is, and the method I've been using myself, is what I will typically do is use the software and use whatever model you want, but use the software to estimate the pH addition up front. I'll add the majority of that acid up front. So let's say I need 10 mils of lactic acid. I'll add like 8 of it up front, saying that will probably get me close to the pH range that I want, even if I'm brewing a new beer that I haven't brewed before, right? And all I'm trying to do is get into that like 5.1 to 5.6 range, okay? And I'd like that to happen as soon as possible because all this conversion happens as soon as I mix the grains in, right? And then what I'll do is I'll wait until I'm all doughed in and I've got things settled down. And then I can take a mash pH measurement, what, as you mentioned, might be 25 minutes into the thing or 20 minutes into the thing. And then if I need to, I'll make a final adjustment. So, let's say I don't know, for my personal preferences, I like, if I'm brewing something really light and really light beer, I might want to actually drive that mash pH down to that 5.2 level. So that's when I'll take that final measurement and maybe make a final acid adjustment to get me down to where I want to be. But that's the method I recommend because these grains are so highly modified and they convert so fast. You'd like to be in the right pH range when you're doing that conversion. So you really need to add a little bit of the acid up front. Make sense? Good.
Yep. Yeah, and I always tell, it's the same thing I tell people is that modern malts are so enzymatically hot they convert if you just look at them funny.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
All right, so we got a lot of sync questions and the gang's all talking about notes and where to sync everything. So I think we'll let them work that through. Any other questions here for Brad? Oh, well, this is a fun question from a technical point of view.
Yeah.
What language or languages is Beersmith, say the desktop version, built on, and where'd you learn to code?
So this is an interesting thing. So I learned to code in college, I guess, or actually in high school. I started. You guys, the old people will appreciate this. I started on an IBM 1130 with punch cards.
Nice.
And that was my first computer that I used. And then eventually I talked my dad into buying me a VIC-20 when I was graduating from high school. So that was a big step up.
Yeah, my first one was a TI-99 4A with a tape drive.
Oh man, that's too expensive. I couldn't afford that. I had to save up. I had to work all summer to buy a tape drive. Anyway, so, but no, so the Beersmith 1 was in C++, only on Windows, because I wrote it back in the day. And then the Beersmith 2, which was the first one that was cross-platform, was actually in, again in C++, but cross-platform using something called WX widgets, which I get a lot of complaints. So Beersmith looks dated and out of style and all this stuff. It's a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm running it on a cross-platform tool that has to run on Mac and Linux and PC and all that stuff. So you know, one of the projects on my to-do list, I want to update that. And then after that, of course, the website is in PHP and MySQL, beersmithrecipes.com, and then increasingly in JavaScript. So a lot of that's in JavaScript. The mobile version is also in JavaScript, so I can run across Android and iOS. And so I support a lot of different platforms because I got Linux, Mac, PC, Android, iOS, and now I'm working on a web-based version which has got JavaScript and PHP. So a lot of stuff, and I actually do all the coding still. So I write all the software myself. So even I'm doing the, I don't know, third or fourth, probably a fourth or fifth rewrite of Beersmith now with the web-based version. Although I've got a good head start from the mobile version, but it's a lot of work, as you might imagine. It's kind of fun. But I have an experience in programming. I've been doing it my whole life, but I actually have 5 degrees. I've got a PhD in computer engineering. I've got 3 master's degrees, and I used to be a rocket scientist. Drew can tell you more about that. I think we've talked about it.
Yes, we have. No, well, and it's interesting to see like just how much work that is. And I mean, this is your full-time job now, right?
Yeah, I've been doing this for 10 years. So I retired. I was a colonel in the Air Force. I retired out of the Air Force in 2010, and so entering my 11th year now, I guess, working from home.
So you've been well prepared for everybody working from home all this time.
Yeah, well, we had some big adjustments when I first retired. My wife was not really happy with me being at home full time, but she got over it after a year or two. And yeah, it hasn't been too bad. I do miss the gym horribly though. Right now.
Yes, you and me both. All right. So gang, any last questions, and then we'll let Brad go back to having a Sunday.
Yeah, I had posted one up there. It's kind of a long shot question, but I don't know whether he has any support in there for or recipes for developing a graph, which is a blend of beer and cider. So
I don't have specific stuff for that. One of the challenges I've had over the years is people, even with simple things like party guile brewing, is you can almost start merging stuff at almost any point in the brewing process. So it becomes really complicated when you start going, say, I want to split this at 2 batches. Well, where do you want to split it in 2 batches? Or I want to merge this and, I want to make braggot. I want to merge mead and beer. Well, when do you merge those? Because that's really important when you're building a piece of software. So no, unfortunately, I don't have that. I mean, there are tools that can help you. Like if you're playing with finished cider and finished beer, you can do things like play with the dilution tool in Beersmith to help figure out what the gravity is going to be when you merge them together and stuff like that. But I do not have specific support for that.
Yeah, I always cheat, and I create a new recipe that is intended to be the blending recipe, and that way I can do all my calculations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we were planning on doing it pre-fermentation. But yeah, I can see where mead to where you add the honey into your mash, then you're going to get a different result than trying to boil the honey and then create your wort and then blend then. But
my personal recommendation, if you're blending anything, is really a lot of times it's easier to create 2 different beverages and then blend them, because you can blend it to taste. So if I'm making a braggot, I'm going to go make a big mead and I'm going to make a big beer, and I'm going to blend them together to taste, because trying to get that taste balance perfectly right off the bat is almost impossible. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you have a dilution calculation as well? I had to kind of create my own.
Yeah,
on
there's
my
a dilution
spreadsheet.
tool.
So,
There is a dilution tool in Beersmith that lets you do simple things like if I take, this much beverage with this gravity and this much beverage with this gravity, this is what the resulting, sort of final gravity is. And you can even play with the back sweeten tool. When I was making a lot of meads, I like to make giant fruit meads, for example. And the key to making a giant fruit mead is balancing the acidity from the mead, something like raspberries that have a lot of acidity, against the sweetness, the residual sweetness from the honey. So you do crazy things like take a mead and you make a mead, you start the mead at, I don't know, like 1160 or something like that, betting that it's going to lose 100 points of gravity and get down to 10, let's see, I had to do it right. 100, no, it's 110 points of gravity, I think it loses. So you start at 1150 and you get it down to a 1040. And then you have to have enough acidity to balance that residual sweetness left. Does that make sense? So if I make a
Yeah.
black currant mead, I can do that. And
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
and what you're doing is you're actually waiting for the yeast to die out because of alcohol poisoning. So the yeast dies out, alcohol poisoning stops at a really high gravity. That gives you the residual sweetness you want to balance the fruit. So now you get into, but you can do the same thing with back sweetening. So I can achieve that same balance by fermenting a mead all the way out and then back sweetening it up to the sweetness level that I want, right? To get the balance I want for the fruit that I'm working with. So, those are the kinds of things you can play with. And there is a back sweetening tool that helps you do that. So in some cases,
okay.
I was making a big fruit mead and I missed. Let's say I made a giant fruit mead and the gravity came in a little too low and it was a little too acidic or too sour. I could go back and back sweeten that, stabilize it and then back sweeten it to get the gravity back up to where I want to be with a little bit of honey. And there's a tool for doing that. So those are some of the things you can play with.
Oh, okay. I'm usually kind of working the other direction. I do ice ciders. And so usually I wind up with a little too much sweetness. And so I have to adjust the TA. And I had to kind of create my own spreadsheet programs. So if you got some of this already, then you probably have some other things on there that might be useful too.
Yeah, some of the tools are, the sorbate calculators, sorbate and sulfite calculators are in there, so you can play with like the free sulfate. I know a lot of mead and cider makers play with sulfite in order to stabilize the beer, or stabilize the beverage, I should say.
I can't.
There's a lot of that stuff built in.
Sorbate.
But you're right. Some of it's a black art, like figuring out exactly how much fruit you need to balance out a really big mead. Is it takes some time and experience. There's not and I did the same thing you did. I have spreadsheets that help me with some of the stuff, but there's not a known quantity where you can go, oh yeah, you need exactly 3 gallons of black currants in order to make a 5-gallon batch of mead. There's no perfect way to do that.
Right. All right. I think we'll get one last question in here, and then we'll let Brad go, and we'll get into the Eagle Rock beer.
And then you guys can all vote for Drew, right?
Yeah. No, it's a 2-month long process, and I will.
Aren't you voting now?
I will fight every step of the way. All right. The last question is, when will we expect the hop and malt updates for 2021 for the add-ons? When can we expect those?
So I did the 2020 ones just a few months ago, so not that soon, but I will certainly go in and do that. What I've got going on right now, I actually have somebody assisting me. They're going through the existing add-ons and just kind of auditing those to figure out what we're missing for, like the grain providers are constantly updating their stuff and the other stuff. I believe the yeasts are virtually all up to date now. But I'll double check. At least the major yeast producers like White Labs and Y Yeast and so on, because we put their entire library in there when we did the last update, including even like distilling yeast and stuff that a lot of people don't use that much. So I think if you grab the current ones, you're actually pretty close to current. But as you pointed out, there are people, they're constantly adding new stuff. And so I actually have an assistant now that is helping me audit those one at a time and then bring them up to date, because it's a constant battle. I don't even know how many add-ons there are anymore. It's probably close to 100. It's hard keeping them all up to date.
All right, there we go. Alon, I think you were on to ask something.
Yeah. So then, are you the only person that's working on the development side of all this?
Yeah, I do all the programming and I do the vast majority of the support and everything else. My wife helps me a little bit with marketing, and I have a few people that are, sort of part-time that assist me more with like data and things like that. So yes, I work a lot.
Amazing.
I
Well,
work
great
hard.
job building this thing. It's great.
Yeah, it's kind of nice because it's been done over a period of years. I have to say the community has been great too, because like, I don't own all these equipment profiles. I mean, I don't, I don't know all these equipment setups. So, and people send me equipment profiles. They'll send me data profiles a lot of times. So it's very nice. It's actually gotten to the point now where the program is so prolific that the maltsters and a lot of the companies will actually do the work for me now. So they'll come in and say, we really want to add our grain. I mean, big in South America right now. So right now there's a bunch of places in South America that have contacted me that want to add their grains or their yeast, and it's literally the supplier coming in and saying, what do I have to do to get my grain listing, or what do I have to do to get my yeast listing into your program? And it's fairly easy to do that. So.
All right. Well, there you go, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time here on a Sunday, particularly after a long drive, to come talk to us.
Well, Drew, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. And best luck to all of you during the pandemic. Hopefully it'll be winding to an end here shortly. I'm certainly hoping. I'm with Drew. I'm hoping we get to HomebrewCon this year, right?
It'd be nice.
Down in San Diego.
It'd be nice.
That's my hope. I think the papers.
Hey,
last
Brad,
papers.
do you ever get time to brew? Brad,
I do
you
actually.
ever get time to brew?
I do. I don't brew quite as much beer now because of the lockdown, though. Because I used to go to events or go to meetings or whatever, and I could share my beer and stuff. And the problem I have now, if I make 10 gallons of beer, it's going to take me a long time to drink that by myself. And we're just not having guests over to the house like we were, So I have cut back a little on my brewing, but I'm still making, I also, I really enjoy the mead and the cider and all the other stuff too. And I actually been doing a little bit more of the mead and wine stuff now, only because, I can make a batch of mead and it'll last me 5 or 6 years. You know what I mean? Not, whereas if I make 10 gallons of porter, I can really enjoy it this winter, but I'm probably not going to finish all 10 gallons. And then, and then what do I do with it? Because in a year or so, it'll go bad. So.
Yeah, well, that's it sounds like the perfect time to explore small batch brewing then. I've
been talking to John Blickman about getting one of his little anvil system, tabletop systems where I can do, a smaller batch. Because the problem I have is right now, my main system's a 10-gallon system, and it's too much for me to drink it, quite honestly.
Yeah, I agree. I know the pain, but look at it this way. Think of it as exploratory to make sure that Beersmith calculations are accurate in a smaller batch version.
I agree.
All right. Well, Brad, again, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate you walking people through. People can always ask you questions via email.
Of course.
So if you didn't get your questions answered today, or if you're walking away and you're going and grabbing a beer and going, damn it, I forgot to ask that, where can they email you?
Beersmith@beersmith.com is the main one. So
there you go.
Pretty easy to find. And
right.
Drew, thank you again for having me on. And remember, everybody, vote for Drew. 4 more years.
If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. All right. So Brad, again, thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and we're going to get on to that Eagle Rock beer. I hope you all managed to get your cans. The club bought these cans for you, so drink up.
I'm probably going to drop out.
Yep, feel free.
Other things. Thanks.
Feel free. Thank you, sir.
Brad.
Bye.
All right. So yeah, everybody get your cans of Homebound, and we will talk about it and taste it.